The phone call came in the middle of a quiet evening, when the world outside was blanketed in the silence that only comes in the late hours. It had been years since I heard from any of them, my family. I thought I had long since moved on, found my peace, and buried the wounds they had left on me. But the call shattered that illusion. David, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the day they kicked me out of the family. That day, 3 years ago, felt like it belonged to another lifetime. "We need you to come to the house," she said, her voice strained with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "It's about James." I froze. James. My older cousin, the one who had always been the golden child in our family, the one who could do no wrong. The one who I had tried to warn. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my heart thudded loudly in my chest. "What happened?" I asked, barely able to keep the edge of disbelief out of my voice. "He's getting a divorce, David. He needs you." The words didn't register at first. The last time I saw James was when they all turned their backs on me, when I told him the truth about Elena. My cousin's fiancée. She had been cheating on him, and not just with anyone, no, it had been with Daniel, our younger cousin, a guy I had once called a friend. It felt like a lifetime ago. How had everything turned out this way? Why did they need me now? And more importantly, why should I help them after everything they did to me? I tried to push the bitter thoughts aside. There was more at stake here than just me and my hurt. "Why?" I demanded, trying to make sense of it. "Why do you need me?" My mother's voice broke slightly, her words shaky. "He wants to avoid paying child support, David. He wants you to testify about Elena's affair. We need you to tell the truth in court." I felt a chill race down my spine. A twisted part of me wanted to laugh. The same people who had dismissed me, ostracized me, and accused me of lying were now crawling back, begging for my help. They wanted me to be their savior now that their perfect little world had crumbled around them. For years, I had lived with the knowledge that I was right all along, that Elena was unfaithful and that my family had turned against me without even giving me a chance to explain. I had spent nights tossing and turning, haunted by the decisions they had made. But I had also spent those years healing, learning to live without them, without their toxic expectations, without their betrayal. "Why should I help you?" I said, my voice cold and steady. "Why should I help any of you after everything you did?" I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "David, please. He's not the same. He's been hurt. He's sorry. We're all sorry. Please. Just come and talk to us. You owe us this. We're a family." Family. That word twisted in my gut. The truth was, I didn't owe them anything. They had made their decision when they chose Elena's word over mine, when they sided with her over the truth. I had warned them. I had tried to protect James from a life of lies, from a woman who had shown her true colors long before the ink was dry on their engagement. But they didn't believe me. They made their choice, and now they were paying for it. "Family?" I repeated, almost laughing. "You cut me off when I tried to protect him, and now you want me to help you after all this time? When it's convenient for you. When you need something." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her soft breathing, her failed attempt at regaining control. "You're right," she said, her voice small. "But we need you, David. Please. If you help us, we can fix things. We can make it right." The bitterness that had been festering in me for the last few years resurfaced, stronger than ever. I wanted to tell her no, to slam the door in their faces and never look back. But there was a part of me, a small, twisted part, that wanted closure. I wanted to see James fall, to watch him realize what he had lost because of his own blindness. I wanted him to understand how deeply he had wronged me. But in the end, I knew it wouldn't bring me peace. It would only perpetuate the cycle of resentment, of bitterness that had defined my relationship with them for far too long. "I'm not going to do it," I said, my voice firm. I could almost hear her heart breaking on the other end of the line. "David. Please. Do you even know how many nights I spent wondering if you'd come to your senses?" I asked, my voice rough with emotion. "How many times I tried to convince myself that I was wrong, that I'd misunderstood. But you all turned your backs on me. You called me a liar, a bitter failure, a jealous cousin. And now you want me to help you?" There was another long silence, and then she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "We were wrong. You were right. Elena. She was never faithful. She was with Daniel, and she's been lying to all of us for years. But please, David. Please, help us now." I hung up the phone before she could say anything else. The following days felt like a strange haze. I went through the motions of my daily life, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. But as the days wore on, I began to hear rumors. James was fighting for custody of the children, trying to avoid paying child support for the child Elena had conceived with Daniel. He was desperate. And my family was scrambling to salvage what little reputation they had left, trying to force me into taking the stand. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The thought of stepping into that courtroom, of having my voice be the one to tear apart the last shred of dignity they had left, made my stomach churn. The family I had once tried to protect was a sinking ship, and I wasn't about to throw them a lifeline now. Then came the news that James had somehow managed to avoid paying child support. It turned out that Daniel had stepped up as the child's father, likely under pressure from Elena. Elena and Daniel were now engaged, planning a life together after the mess they had created. But I couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was doomed from the start. The lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, it was all part of who they were. And I couldn't see it lasting. How could it? Months passed, and things seemed to settle into a strange sort of quiet. James and Elena were finalizing their divorce, and the family had moved on to new battles. But I couldn't help but feel that the world had turned in a way I could never have imagined. I had been right all along, but the price had been higher than I ever expected. I had walked away from the wreckage, but the scars would always remain. I wasn't ready to reconcile with my family, not yet. Maybe one day, I would be. But for now, I had to focus on myself. On the life I had built, the people who truly cared for me. I wasn't going to let them pull me back into the chaos, not when I had finally found peace. A few years later, I received a letter from James. He didn't ask for my help this time. Instead, he wrote to apologize. He admitted that I had been right, that he had been blind, that he had let his pride and his love for Elena cloud his judgment. He thanked me for trying to protect him, even if it meant losing everything. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel something for him. Regret? Maybe. But mostly, it was just relief. That chapter of my life was closed. I had learned to live without them, and now they were just a distant memory. I would never forget the pain they caused me, but I no longer needed their validation. I had moved on. The letter from James sat on my kitchen table for days, unopened. My fingers brushed over the envelope, and I could feel the weight of all the years that had passed since the last time I had any real connection with him or the rest of the family. The words inside didn't matter as much as the gesture. It was an apology, sure, but it wasn't for me. It was for his own peace of mind, a final attempt to ease his guilt, to reconcile with the past he couldn't change. I eventually opened it, reading his words carefully. He spoke of regret, of lessons learned, of how he had come to see the truth in the end. He admitted his faults, his blindness to Elena's deception, and how the entire affair had devastated him. His marriage had crumbled, his family had splintered, and he was left with nothing but the fallout. I could almost hear the desperation in his words, as though he was hoping my forgiveness could somehow undo the years of damage. But as I read the letter, I realized something. His apology was too little, too late. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the acknowledgement of the pain he and the rest of the family had caused me, it was that I didn't need it anymore. I had moved on. I had spent years building my life away from the toxicity of their world, finding peace in the quiet hum of my own existence. Sure, there were nights when loneliness crept in, when I missed the idea of family, but I had come to realize that the family I once knew wasn't the same anymore. They were a shadow of what they once were, broken and scattered, struggling to put themselves back together, while I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. The thing that hurt the most was that, all those years ago, I had tried to warn them. I had tried to be the one voice of reason in a sea of denial and lies. But I had been punished for it, cast aside like a pariah, as though my truth didn't matter. And in the end, it was their own choices that had led them down the painful path they now walked. I sat down at my desk and penned a reply. I didn't know what I expected from it, maybe some closure, maybe a sense of finality, or maybe just a chance to express everything I had bottled up for all these years. The truth was, I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me. For my own peace. James. Thank you for your letter. I've read it, and I've thought about it. And while I appreciate your apology, I want you to understand that it doesn't change anything. The damage was done long before you realized the truth. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter. I've learned to live without the family I thought I could rely on, and I've built something of my own that I'm proud of. What happened, happened. You can't undo it. Neither can I. But I hope that, Moving forward, you'll learn to make better choices. Not just in the people you trust, but in how you treat the ones who care about you. Because I tried to protect you, and in the end, I was the one who lost everything. This is the last time we'll speak, James. I'm at peace with that, and I think you should be too. Take care. David. I sealed the envelope and sent it off, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt no pull to return to that world. I didn't need to see them again, to attend family gatherings or play the role of the dutiful cousin. I had my own life now, filled with friends who valued me for who I was, not who they expected me to be. As time went on, the letter faded into memory, another small chapter closed. James never replied. Elena and Daniel's relationship seemed to fizzle out just as I had expected, though I never bothered to keep track of their drama. James moved on as well, and though he never tried to reconnect, I could hear bits and pieces of his life through the occasional cousin who reached out to me. The truth was, he had changed, but I had changed too. We were both different people now. A few months after sending that letter, I stood in front of my apartment window, looking out over the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting golden hues across the horizon, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The past was behind me, a place I didn't need to revisit anymore. I had learned from it, but I had no desire to carry it with me any longer. Life wasn't perfect. I still had my struggles, my moments of doubt and fear. But I had built something for myself, something no one could take away. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of who I was, of what I had overcome. I didn't need the approval of my family anymore. I didn't need their forgiveness or their validation. I had found my own way, and that was enough. As I stood there, letting the cool breeze brush against my face, I felt something shift within me, a quiet resolution. I wasn't going to wait for some dramatic reunion or grand gesture of redemption. I had already moved on. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all? The family I once knew might never be the same, but I was okay with that. I had forged my own path, and it was leading me to a life I had carved out on my own terms. And for the first time in years, I smiled. The days following that letter were calm, almost serene. I didn't hear from James again, nor did I expect to. The silence that filled the space between us felt comfortable, almost like the quiet that follows a thunderstorm, heavy at first but eventually giving way to peace. In the months that passed, I watched as my life continued to evolve. I poured myself into my work, becoming more established in my career as a copywriter. My friendships deepened, and I began to nurture relationships with people who truly understood me, people who valued me for who I was, not for some idealized version of what they wanted me to be. They were the family I had chosen, and with them, I found the connection I had longed for. But even though I had moved on, part of me still carried the scars of the past. There were nights when the memories would resurface, the arguments with my parents, the coldness in James's eyes when he rejected the truth I had shared, the feeling of being completely abandoned. I wasn't immune to the lingering hurt, but I had learned to live with it. One day, a few months after I sent my letter, I ran into someone unexpected. It was at a small cafe near my apartment, the kind of place I liked to go to escape from the noise of the city. I had just picked up my coffee and was heading to a table by the window when I saw her. Elena. She was sitting at a table, her eyes focused on her phone, oblivious to the world around her. For a moment, I debated turning around and leaving. I had no desire to speak with her, to relive the past, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that small, stubborn part of me that still needed some form of closure. I walked over slowly, and when she looked up, there was that flash of recognition in her eyes. A brief flicker of guilt, then nothing. She put her phone down and gave me a tight smile, the kind of smile that said, "I know what you know, and I don't care." "David," she said, as though it was a name from a distant memory. "How have you been?" I didn't return her smile. "Fine." She shifted uncomfortably, and I realized that the tension in the air wasn't just mine, it was hers too. She had always been good at pretending, at wearing the mask of confidence even when she knew she was caught. But now, with her life unraveling around her, I could see the cracks. She wasn't the powerful, untouchable woman I remembered from years ago. She was just a person, like me, trying to find her way in a world full of mistakes. "I heard about the divorce," I said, my voice measured. "And that you and Daniel are, well, together now." Elena's eyes darted to the side for a brief second, then back at me. "It's complicated," she said, almost defensively. I raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" She looked away, her hands fiddling with the napkin on the table. "James doesn't know everything," she said quietly. "There were things that happened that you don't understand." I didn't feel the need to press her further. It wasn't my job to untangle her web of lies anymore. "You're right," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. "I don't understand. And honestly, I don't care." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was a flicker of regret in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I just wanted you to know," she said softly, "that I'm sorry." I stared at her, the years of resentment and betrayal rushing to the surface. But this time, I didn't let it take over. I had already let go of that anger, already moved past it. The apology, though sincere, didn't change the past. It didn't erase the lies, the broken promises, or the damage done to James, and to me. "I don't need your apology," I said simply. "It doesn't change anything. It's too late for that." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, she seemed vulnerable. "I know," she whispered, before standing up and walking out of the cafe, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Over the next few months, I found myself reflecting more on the choices I had made and the path I had walked. The memories of my family, of James, of Elena, of all the years I had spent trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, slowly faded into the background. I still thought about them sometimes, but it wasn't with bitterness anymore. It was with a kind of detachment, a recognition that people change, and sometimes, relationships end not because of malice but because of the simple truth that we outgrow them. I had outgrown that life. One evening, as I sat on my couch scrolling through old pictures on my phone, I came across a photo of James and me from when we were kids. We were standing next to each other at a family reunion, both of us grinning into the camera, unaware of how much our lives would change in the years to come. I stared at it for a while, wondering what had happened to that bond we once shared. It felt like a lifetime ago. I thought about what it would take to rebuild that relationship, to bring it back to some semblance of what it had been. But the truth was, I didn't think I wanted that anymore. The time for reconciliation had passed. I had changed, and so had he. It wasn't about forgiving them or forgetting what they had done. It was about accepting that things were different now. I had my own life, my own people, and I was content with that. A year later, I received a message from James. It was brief, just a simple text that read, "I'm sorry, David. I should have listened to you. I was wrong. I hope you're doing well." I sat with that message for a while, turning it over in my mind. I could have responded. I could have said something, offered some kind of closure, or a sign that maybe, just maybe, there could be a way back to some semblance of family. But I didn't. Instead, I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and smiled. I was doing well. I was more than okay. And that was enough. I wasn't going to let the past dictate my future any longer. I had taken control of my own story, and for the first time in years, I felt free. And so, my journey continued, one step at a time, one day at a time. The past was behind me, and the future stretched out ahead, full of possibilities. I didn't know what it would bring, but I was ready. Because I had learned that the most important relationship I would ever have was with myself. And with that, I closed the door on the family I once knew, and walked into the life I had created for myself. The text from James lingered on my phone for days, a quiet echo of the past, but I knew deep down that it didn't hold the power it once would have. The emotions that used to be attached to that name, my cousin, my family, the one who had once been so close, had all faded, replaced by a kind of calm indifference. The message was just a reminder that time had passed, that people grew, that lives shifted, sometimes irreparably. But for a long while, I thought about it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed. I just felt done. The person I used to be, the one who craved recognition from my family, who longed to belong, had disappeared long ago. And in his place, a person who understood that family didn't necessarily mean blood. Family meant the people who showed up, who cared, who accepted you for who you were, not who they wanted you to be. And with that understanding, I chose not to respond. Not out of spite, but because it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't a moment of revenge or bitterness, it was simply acceptance. I spent the next few months immersed in my own life, my work, my friends, my small but growing circle of people who truly cared. I traveled a little, rediscovered old hobbies I'd forgotten about during the years of familial turmoil. I even began writing again, not with the dream of becoming a famous author, but for the pure joy of it, something I hadn't experienced in years. The words flowed, more freely than they ever had before. I realized that, in the chaos and the heartache, I had found something more important than validation from anyone else: peace. I didn't need my family to define me. I was carving my own identity, creating my own version of family. I had learned that blood ties didn't make someone family, actions did. Loyalty, love, respect. Those were the things that mattered. And I found them in the people around me, the friends who had stood by me when the rest of the world had turned away. One afternoon, about a year after I'd sent my letter to James, I got a phone call from Daniel. At first, I didn't recognize the number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but then, for some inexplicable reason, I answered. "David?" The voice on the other end was hesitant but unmistakable. "Yeah, this is David," I said, trying to place the voice. "It's Daniel," he said after a moment, almost like he was bracing himself. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to reach out." I sat up a little straighter, feeling a sudden rush of tension. "What do you want?" I just wanted to apologize," Daniel said, the words coming out quickly, almost like he couldn't get them out fast enough. "I know things have been messy, and I know I was part of the mess. I should have never done what I did with Elena. I should have listened to you. You were right, and I've regretted it every day since." I didn't respond immediately. I hadn't expected this. Elena's affair with Daniel had torn apart so many things, but hearing his genuine regret in his voice shifted something inside me. He wasn't trying to win me back as a friend. He wasn't trying to erase the past. He was just admitting his mistake. For the first time, I could hear the truth in his words. "I know I've probably lost all right to ask this, but I just want to say that I'm sorry for everything," Daniel continued. "And I understand if you don't want to talk to me ever again." I let out a slow breath. It wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was the one that had been missing all those years ago, the kind of apology that acknowledged the harm done, that didn't try to excuse it, and that came without any strings attached. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he was simply offering it. "You don't need to apologize to me," I said finally. "But I appreciate you saying it. You've got to live with your choices, just like I've had to live with mine. We all have." There was a long pause, and then he said, I wanted you to know I see it now. Everything. The way you were treated. The way we both let things go too far." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah. We all make choices. But some of those choices, they stick with you." "Yeah, they do," he replied quietly. "Take care of yourself, David." "Yeah. You too." As time moved on, my life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. The letter from James and the phone call from Daniel were final echoes from a past I'd moved on from. I learned to let them go, not just for my own peace, but because they had their own paths to walk now. Paths that no longer intersected with mine. I was in control of my own story now. My family, for better or worse, had played their part, but I wasn't defined by them anymore. I had discovered who I was on my own terms, and that was something no one could take away. One day, while sitting at my desk, my mind wandering between the words I was writing and the world outside my window, I realized something. There would always be remnants of the past, the pain, the lessons, the scars, but they didn't define me. They were just parts of the story, chapters that had already been written. The future, however, was wide open, and it was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. I was free. Free of the past, free of the people who had once tried to control my narrative. And now, I was the author of my own life. And that was all that mattered. As the months passed, life unfolded in ways I had never expected. I had gotten used to the quiet, to the peace that came from no longer being tethered to a past I couldn't change. The weight of everything that had happened, the family rifts, the betrayals, the pain, slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a new sense of freedom. I wasn't bound by the expectations of my family or the remnants of a life I had left behind. Work flourished. I continued to build my career, not just as a copywriter but also in ways that felt more authentic to me. I took up more freelance projects that aligned with my passions, writing for causes I cared about, exploring creative avenues I hadn't considered before. I was building something that mattered to me, not to anyone else. Friendships grew deeper, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly connected to the people around me, those who saw me for who I was, not through the distorted lens of family expectations. The friends I had chosen, the people who had been there for me through the roughest parts of my journey, became my new foundation. They were the family I had built from the ground up, and it felt right. Genuine. But, of course, the past has a way of lingering in the shadows, no matter how far you've come. I hadn't heard from James or Elaine or anyone else in the family since the day I sent my letter. And I was fine with that. I didn't need their approval anymore. It was almost a relief that they hadn't tried to re-enter my life, as if I had drawn a clear line that couldn't be crossed. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I received an unexpected call. "David," my mother's voice cracked through the phone. I don't know if you're going to want to hear this, but James is in trouble. He's been accused of something at work, and it's serious." I felt my heart lurch in my chest. The last time I'd spoken to her was the day I sent the letter to James. The silence had been mutual since then, but now, here she was, reaching out to me for help. I didn't know what to say. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. The words felt foreign in my mouth, but I wasn't angry. I was numb, as though everything had already played out in my head before this call came. "Because we need you, David," she continued, voice trembling. "We need you to testify. To help him, for the sake of the family. He's made mistakes, but he's family, and we can't just let him go down like this. Please. You're the only one who can help us." I was silent for a long time, feeling a tightness build in my chest, a knot that wouldn't loosen. My mind flashed back to everything that had led up to this moment, everything that had driven me away, the years of betrayal, the way my warnings had been ignored, the way I had been dismissed when I was the only one trying to save him from himself. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said finally, my voice steady. "But I can't help him. I'm not part of that world anymore." She gasped, a hurt sound, like she wasn't prepared for the rejection. "But David, this is your brother, your family." "He's not my family anymore," I interrupted, the words feeling like a relief, like a weight being lifted. "You all made your choices. I made mine. I've spent years trying to rebuild my life without the dysfunction of the past dragging me down. I can't go back." There was a long pause, and I could hear her sniffling on the other end, her sobs muffled. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I thought maybe you'd forgive us. But I understand. I understand. It's just so hard, David." "I know," I replied, my voice softer now. "But I can't keep making myself a part of a family that didn't stand by me when I needed them." The conversation ended in silence. I felt nothing at first, just the calm aftermath of a storm that had passed. No guilt. No regret. Just clarity. Months passed, and life continued to move forward. James's career eventually fell apart. It was a slow, painful unraveling that played out in the tabloids and gossip columns, but I never followed it. Part of me wondered if my refusal to help had contributed to his downfall, but then again, his choices were his own. His mistakes had been a long time coming, and no amount of support from me could have saved him from the consequences. In the end, Elena and Daniel moved away, quietly slipping out of the family narrative, their own lives tangled in the aftermath of their decisions. I never heard from them again, and I had no reason to seek them out. The pieces of the past that once felt so important, so consuming, had finally faded into distant memories. And then, one evening, a friend of mine mentioned something casually, almost offhand. "Did you hear James is moving to another city? Apparently, he's starting over." I wasn't surprised, but a small part of me felt something, maybe sadness, maybe just a recognition of how much time had passed. There was a twinge of something, a flicker of a moment when I wondered if it had all been worth it. But I quickly shook it off. It was just another part of the story I no longer needed to write. I was living my life. I was thriving, growing, and finding joy in the little things, small victories, the quiet moments that made up the life I had carefully crafted. The past was just that, the past. A part of me that no longer had control over who I was or where I was going. And so, I stood at the edge of the next chapter, looking forward with clear eyes. I wasn't looking for closure, for some grand, dramatic reunion. I was simply living. I had learned that family wasn't always about blood. It was about the connections you choose, the people who show up when you need them the most. I had found that. I had found peace. And in that peace, I was free. As the years passed, I settled into my life with a sense of quiet satisfaction, a deep, unspoken knowing that I had carved out the space I needed, free from the constraints of the past. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, not just physically or professionally, but emotionally. I had faced the hardest truths, confronted the people who had hurt me, and come out the other side, stronger, more self-assured, and far more comfortable in my own skin. My career blossomed. I became known in my field, not just for my technical skills, but for my authenticity and commitment to my craft. The relationships I nurtured were deep and meaningful, built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. I had created a world for myself that was solid, unwavering, and, most importantly, mine. No longer did I feel the weight of family expectations pressing down on me. I was my own person, finally. Yet, every now and then, something would remind me of the past, the faces of people I once called family, the echoes of old memories, the conversations that had long been forgotten but resurfaced in fragments. But instead of feeling sadness or regret, I had come to a place of acceptance. I had learned that people change, circumstances shift, and sometimes, the best thing you can do is let go. I didn't look for reconciliation. I didn't seek closure from anyone, least of all my parents or James. What happened, happened. What was said, was said. The lies, the betrayal, the years of misunderstanding, they were all part of the journey that had led me here. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I simply didn't need them to define my story. My life was mine to live, and I had made peace with that. One evening, while I was out for a walk in the crisp autumn air, I bumped into an old acquaintance. She was someone I'd known back in the days when things with my family were still complicated, an old friend from a distant part of my life, someone I hadn't seen in years. She smiled when she recognized me, and we exchanged pleasantries. "How have you been?" she asked, her eyes filled with curiosity. I smiled back, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. "I've been good. Really good." She paused, as if considering something for a moment before speaking again. "I saw James a few weeks ago. He looked different. I don't know, just not like the guy I remembered." The mention of his name didn't stir any particular emotion in me. There was no anger, no old wounds reopening, just a quiet acknowledgement that we had all moved on. "Yeah, well, we all change," I said with a shrug, feeling an odd sense of distance from the past. "I'm not sure who he is anymore. I don't really keep track." She nodded, as if she understood. "I get it. People go through things, and sometimes you just have to let go." I smiled, the words resonating deeply within me. I had let go. And in doing so, I had found a version of myself that I hadn't known was possible. I had learned to walk away from the past with grace, no longer tethered to the ghosts of old expectations. As I continued my walk, I realized that I had finally reached a place where the past no longer haunted me. It wasn't about forgetting, it wasn't about excusing or forgiving. It was about living, in the present, in the here and now, with a full heart and a mind at peace. Years passed, and every now and then, I would hear about the people I once called family, through mutual acquaintances or the occasional news story. James had left the city, had tried his hand at new ventures, and Elena and Daniel were still together, though it seemed their relationship had its own set of struggles. I could never really bring myself to care enough to check in on them. Their lives had taken a different trajectory, and I had mine. I still wondered sometimes if I'd made the right choices, if I was doing the right thing by keeping my distance, but the answer always came easily. I had chosen to live authentically, to build a life I was proud of, surrounded by people who supported me. The fact that I had done so without relying on the approval or acceptance of my family was a testament to my strength and resilience. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I had found a peace I hadn't known was possible. One quiet evening, while sitting in the cozy apartment I'd made my own, sipping a glass of wine and reading a book, I thought about all the roads I had traveled. The winding, painful, yet transformative journey that had led me here, to this moment of quiet contentment. I was sitting in a life I had built with my own hands. A life that had no room for bitterness or regret, a life full of possibility. There was no need for a dramatic closure or a grand gesture from the past. I had already closed the chapter in my own way, and I was content with the life I had created for myself. The truth was, I was more than okay. I was happy. And that was all that mattered. The phone buzzed with a new message, a text from one of my close friends asking if I was free for dinner. I smiled and texted back, saying I was free and looking forward to it. As I put my phone down, I realized something. This peaceful, quiet contentment, was my closure. It was the resolution I had longed for. The one that didn't come from apologies or reconciliations. It came from within. From knowing who I was, from understanding that I had built a life on my own terms, and from accepting that not every relationship was meant to last. Sometimes, the best way forward is to walk away, to let go of what you can't control, and to find your own path. And as I looked out at the city skyline, the lights twinkling in the distance, I realized there was nothing more I needed. The past was behind me. The future was ahead of me. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be. Free. As the years drifted by, my life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The pain and turmoil of the past had faded into distant memories, each one softened by time and distance. I had embraced the life I had carved for myself, one that was built on the foundation of resilience, independence, and the support of the friends who had become my true family. I was living a life I could be proud of, a life free from the toxic weight of the past, from the expectations of people who couldn't, or wouldn't, understand me. There were days when the silence from my family weighed heavier than others, but it never lasted long. I had become so accustomed to my new reality, one of peace and self-reliance, that the absence of their voices no longer stung. In fact, there were times when I found myself almost grateful for their silence. It allowed me to truly understand that family wasn't just about blood, it was about the bonds we choose to nurture and the people who stand beside us when things get difficult. I had learned that lesson the hard way, but in the end, it had shaped me into someone stronger, someone better. The world continued to move, and so did I. My work flourished. I was recognized in my field for the dedication and creativity I poured into every project, and my career took me places I had once dreamed about but never thought would be possible. I had found my place, my purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. It was a rainy afternoon when I received the email. It was simple, short, and to the point. David. I hope this message finds you well. We wanted to reach out to you because James has asked if you would be willing to meet with him. He's going through a difficult time, and he believes it might help to talk to you. Please let us know if you'd be open to it. Sincerely. Mom. I read the message once, then again, and again. The words felt strange, distant. It had been so long since I'd heard from them, since I'd even thought about them, that the very idea of reconnecting seemed almost foreign. James, of all people, wanted to talk? After all that had happened? After years of ignoring me, of dismissing me as bitter and jealous, now he wanted my help? A strange kind of laughter bubbled up in my chest, bitter and ironic. After all the things I had been through, after all the hurt, after all the years of silence, they were reaching out now? Only when they needed something. Only when their lives had unraveled and they were left with nothing but the wreckage of their choices. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Part of me was angry, a small part, the part that still remembered the sting of betrayal and the years I had spent alone. But another part of me, maybe a wiser, older part, understood that their request was as much about their own guilt as it was about their need for me. They were reaching out because they were lost, and they knew, deep down, that they had failed me. They wanted me to fix things, to fill a hole that their own choices had created. But I didn't need to fix them. I didn't need to carry their burdens anymore. I thought about the life I had built for myself, the people who mattered, the quiet strength I had developed over the years. I thought about how much I had grown, how far I had come from the person I had been when I first tried to warn them. I wasn't that person anymore. And I didn't owe them anything. A week later, I sat in my apartment, looking out the window at the city skyline. The rain had stopped, but the gray clouds still hung in the sky, casting a soft, muted light over everything. It was a peaceful evening, one of those moments that felt like everything was perfectly in place. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to meet with them. I wasn't going to step back into that world where I was just an afterthought, a tool to be used when it was convenient. I had already let go of all that. I had moved on, and it had been the best choice I'd ever made. The phone buzzed. A new message from my mom. David, we understand. I just wanted you to know that we're sorry for everything. I know you've moved on, and I respect that. I hope you're doing well, and that one day, we can all find peace, on our own terms. I stared at the words for a long time. There was no anger in them, no bitterness, just an acknowledgement of the past and an understanding that things could never go back to how they once were. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already found my peace. Life continued to unfold in ways that were both unexpected and beautiful. I became involved in new projects, new creative endeavors that challenged me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I met new people, built more meaningful relationships, and traveled to places that inspired me. The past, with its complications and heartache, slowly became nothing more than a distant chapter, a place I had left behind in pursuit of something better, something truer. And as the years rolled on, I realized something profound. I had been right all along. I had been the one who had seen the truth, who had understood the situation for what it really was. It wasn't about being bitter or jealous, as they had accused me of. It was about love, about loving someone enough to tell them the painful truth, even when it wasn't easy. I had tried to protect them, even if they couldn't see it at the time. I had been the one who had cared enough to be honest, even when it cost me everything. In the end, I had learned that the people who truly matter will see the truth, even if it takes time. And those who don't, well, they'll fade away, leaving you with the people who can see you for who you truly are, and love you despite everything. And so, as the years went by, I walked forward with a heart full of strength, a mind at peace, and a future wide open before me. The past was behind me now, a part of the story that no longer defined me. I had learned to choose my own family, to love myself enough to walk away from toxic situations, and to live my life on my own terms. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt free. As the years continued to unfold, my life grew richer, more complex, and infinitely more satisfying. I had learned to embrace the freedom I had fought so hard to achieve, and each day I felt more rooted in who I was. I had stepped away from the drama, the chaos, the familial expectations that once loomed so large. In its place was a life I had intentionally built, one filled with friends who would become my family, with experiences that had shaped me, and with peace that I had worked tirelessly to earn. My career continued to thrive, though it wasn't just about success anymore. It was about doing work that felt meaningful, work that aligned with my values. I started working on projects that gave me the freedom to express my true self, writing for causes that mattered, creating content that moved people. I had found not just a job, but a purpose. The sting of the past still flickered occasionally, like a far-off echo, but it never lasted long. I knew that the choices I had made, even the difficult ones, had been for my own well-being. I had prioritized my mental and emotional health over the demands of a family that could never truly understand me. And in doing so, I had discovered the strength I never knew I had. It was a Saturday evening when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I hesitated. My instinct was to ignore it, to move forward as I had been doing. But something urged me to answer. "David?" a voice on the other end asked, tentative but familiar. It took me a moment, but then I realized who it was. "Mom?" I replied, my voice steady, though a hint of surprise flickered through me. It had been years since we last spoke, since that final message she had sent. I hadn't expected her to call again. "Yes, it's me." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I know it's been a long time, and I'm sure you weren't expecting to hear from me. But I wanted to check in. To see how you're doing. And to apologize. For everything." I felt a tightness in my chest, but I didn't let it overwhelm me. The old wounds were distant now, no longer raw. "I'm doing well," I said carefully. "I'm happy. Things are good. I've built a life I'm proud of." There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, her voice small but genuine. "I want you to know. I regret everything. The way I treated you. The way we all treated you. I was wrong, David. We were wrong. I didn't know how to respond." Part of me wanted to tell her everything I had felt, every ounce of hurt, the years I had spent carrying the weight of their rejection. But I didn't. I had long since let go of that bitterness. I had made my peace, not for them, but for myself. "Thank you," I said simply. "I appreciate that. I just hope that one day, maybe, we can find a way to heal," she continued, her voice fragile now. "I understand if you don't want to, but I wanted to say it. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I simply listened to the sound of her voice. It wasn't the same apology I had once dreamed of, the one I had hoped would mend all the broken parts of me. But it was a start. A recognition of what had been wrong, a recognition of what I had endured. "I'm at peace with it," I said, my voice steady. "I've moved forward. And I think it's better that way." There was another pause. I could hear the weight of what she was saying, the regret that had settled into her words. "I understand," she whispered. "I'm glad you're happy." "Thank you for calling," I said, my voice softer now. "But I think it's time for both of us to move on." She sighed, a sound full of years of misunderstanding, of attempts at reconciliation that had come too late. "I hope you know how much I love you," she said, her voice trembling. "Even if we never talk again, I'll always love you." "I know," I replied simply. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The words weren't a lifeline to the past, they were a recognition of where I had come from and how far I had traveled. After the call, I sat in silence for a long while, letting the emotions wash over me. There was no anger anymore, no longing for something that could never be. The closure I had once sought had come not in a dramatic confrontation or a sweeping apology, but in the quiet understanding that I had done what was best for me. I had grown, I had learned, and I had healed. That night, I went out to dinner with my closest friends, the ones who had stood by me through the years of uncertainty, the ones who had become my family. We laughed, shared stories, and toasted to the future. As I looked around at the people I had chosen to have in my life, I realized something powerful. Family wasn't about the ties of blood. It was about the people who saw you, supported you, and loved you for who you were. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The past was behind me. The future stretched out in front of me, a landscape full of endless possibilities. And as I raised my glass, I knew that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Free. Happy. Whole. And that was enough. As the years wore on, my life continued to evolve, and the past remained a shadow I had long since learned to live without. The moments that once caused me so much pain, when I had been cut off from my family, dismissed as bitter and jealous, and left to navigate a world that didn't seem to understand me, became mere chapters in the story of my life. I had woven my own narrative, one filled with choice, growth, and independence. I had built a career I could be proud of, one that allowed me to work creatively, travel, and share stories that touched people. I surrounded myself with friends who loved me for who I was, who had witnessed my struggles and triumphs, and who stood by me as the family I had chosen for myself. My relationships, my passions, and my sense of self grew stronger with each passing year. Life, it seemed, had a way of rewarding those who dared to live on their own terms. But even as I moved forward, there were occasional moments when I would reflect on the past. Those rare, quiet evenings when the phone was silent, and my mind wandered to places I didn't often visit. I would remember the call from my mom, the brief, apologetic conversation that had left me feeling both relieved and strangely distant. It had been years since that phone call, and in some ways, I felt that it had already faded into the past. I knew that it was likely the last communication I'd ever have with them, but I didn't carry any anger with me. I had already let go of the need for closure, for validation, or for apologies. I had learned that forgiveness, when it comes, is for you, not the other person, and I had forgiven them long ago, not for their sake, but for my own peace. My life had flourished in ways I had never anticipated. There were still moments of uncertainty, times when doubts would creep in, but they were fleeting. I had learned to trust myself, my instincts, and the strength I had developed over the years. It wasn't until I was traveling for work one summer that I received a message that would force me to confront the past once more. It was from Daniel. My cousin, the one who had once crossed the line with Elena. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since the mess with James and Elena had blown up. I had no real desire to hear from him, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. "David," it began. "I don't expect you to reply, but I owe you an apology. I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I've thought a lot about everything that happened. I was wrong, and I've betrayed you, and your trust, and James. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say it. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen, the words sitting there in front of me. I had never expected an apology from Daniel, let alone one that seemed so sincere. It stirred something in me, a small spark of recognition. I wasn't angry anymore. In fact, I almost felt pity for him, for the life choices he had made, for the web of deceit he had tangled himself in. His apology, like my mother's, was an acknowledgement of past mistakes, but it wasn't going to change anything for me. I thought about it for a long time, before I simply typed back, "Thank you for the message. I've moved on, but I appreciate your honesty. I hope you found peace." That was all I could give. Not for him, but for me. The closure I had once needed had already been found. A few more years passed, and as I got older, I began to look at my life through a different lens. I realized how far I had come, how much I had learned from the people who had been absent in my life and the people who had been there when it mattered. I no longer longed for reconciliation with my family. I had come to understand that sometimes, the best way forward is to simply let go, to stop chasing the ghosts of the past, and to embrace the future with an open heart. I never heard from James again. I never received another message from Elena or anyone else in the family. In some ways, it was like they had all vanished, their absence just another part of the life I had already moved past. But in a way, I was thankful for their silence, for the clarity it had brought me. Now, standing on the precipice of the future, with a life ahead full of possibility, I realized that I had finally become the person I was always meant to be. I had learned that sometimes, The hardest thing you can do is walk away from those you love, or thought you loved, and that doing so doesn't make you heartless. It makes you wise. Wise enough to understand that you can't force others to change, and that sometimes, the most important relationship you have is the one you cultivate with yourself. In the end, it was all about choice. The choice to love yourself enough to walk away. The choice to build a life that reflected who you truly are, without the need for validation from others. The choice to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because you deserve peace. I had walked away from my family, from the people who had once been my world, but in doing so, I had found a family of my own. I had built something real, something lasting, something that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with love, respect, and understanding. So, here I was, stronger, happier, more at peace than I had ever been. And with each new day, I realized just how much I had gained by walking away. The future was bright, and I was ready for whatever it brought. The past was behind me, where it belonged. The future was wide open, full of new adventures, new connections, and new opportunities. And for the first time in my life, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. I was free. And that was more than enough. As the years continued to pass, I stood firmly in the life I had built for myself, a life that was, at its core, mine. The people who mattered to me were those who had been with me through the highs and lows, who understood me without needing explanations. They were the friends who had stepped in when my family turned their backs, the ones who had stayed by my side when I had nothing left but my own strength. The quiet moments of reflection still came from time to time, but they didn't stir the same kind of ache they once had. Instead, they were moments of gratitude. I had created something that was wholly mine, untouched by the pain of the past. One evening, years after the phone calls from my mom and Daniel, I sat in the same apartment I had made my sanctuary. It was the first time in years that I felt compelled to revisit the past, not because I needed answers, but because the path I had walked had shaped me into someone I could finally be proud of. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I had healed. I had grown. I opened an old photo album, the kind you only pull out when you're ready to face memories long buried. There were pictures of James and Elena from happier times, smiles frozen in photos that were now nothing but reminders of a life that had never been mine. There were blurry pictures from family gatherings, moments I had once desperately wanted to belong to, but had never quite found my place in. In the corners of the pages were the moments I had hoped for reconciliation, for love and acceptance. But now, with time and distance, those moments seemed less important. I could finally see them for what they were, snapshots of a life I wasn't meant to be a part of. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf, dusting my hands off, knowing I didn't need to revisit it. What I had in front of me now, what I had built, was enough. And I no longer needed to look back for validation or answers. The only approval I needed was my own. A few months later, I was sitting at a cafe with one of my closest friends, an evening of good food and conversation. We were talking about the future, the strange twists and turns life can take. I had never been more content with where I was. "You know," my friend said, sipping her coffee, "it's wild to think how far you've come. From everything with your family to this, your career, your life. You've done it. You built this. You made it happen." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words deep inside. I didn't have a choice. I had to. And the best part is, there's still more to come. I'm still growing. She nodded. "I've never seen you so sure of yourself. You seem at peace. It's amazing." "Yeah," I said, my smile widening. "It's strange, isn't it? How you think you need someone else's approval to be happy. But all along, it's been about finding peace with myself. I'm in the right place." And for the first time, I truly understood that peace. It wasn't just about the absence of conflict or pain, it was about knowing that I had weathered storms, made hard choices, and come out stronger on the other side. It was about the freedom to be who I was, without the weight of expectations dragging me down. Life had a funny way of bringing things full circle, though. Just when I thought the past was fully behind me, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. It was from a lawyer, subject line, regarding James and Elena's divorce settlement. I clicked it open, my curiosity piqued. Inside, the lawyer explained that they were finalizing James and Elena's divorce and needed a statement about the affair that I had tried to expose all those years ago. Apparently, in the aftermath of everything, Elena had been forced to admit the truth about her infidelities during the court proceedings. James was attempting to avoid paying child support for a child that wasn't his, and they were reaching out to see if I would testify. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of detachment. I thought back to the conversation I'd had with my mom all those years ago, when she had reached out in a moment of crisis. I thought of all the pain that had come from that betrayal, and I felt no sense of anger. Only quiet closure. I leaned back in my chair, contemplating what to do. It was tempting, in some ways. A small part of me wanted to be there for James, to stand in that courtroom and let the truth of it all finally come to light. To be the one who showed them that I had been right all along. But then I remembered a lesson I had learned so many years ago. I didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. I composed my response, typing the words with a calmness that came from a place of acceptance. Thank you for reaching out. While I understand the legal implications, I've moved on from that chapter of my life. I won't be involved in the proceedings. I've found my peace, and I suggest you do the same. I hit send without hesitation. And just like that, the past was behind me. The family, the lies, the betrayal, it was all in the rearview mirror. I had spent years finding my own way, my own path, and it was exactly as it should be. As the years continued to pass, I grew more confident in my choices, more certain that the decisions I had made, no matter how difficult, had been the right ones. I had no desire to look back or make anyone see me differently. I was finally free. And so, as I sat in my apartment, watching the sun set on a new chapter in my life, I realized that the journey I had walked had shaped me into the person I was always meant to be. I wasn't defined by the past anymore. I was defined by my own strength, my own resilience, and my own ability to love and live fully on my own terms. The past had tried to define me, but I was the one who held the pen now. And I had written a story that was all my own. I was free. And I would never look back again. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I realized that the healing I had undergone wasn't just an event that happened years ago, it was a constant, evolving process. Each moment of my life now felt like an affirmation of everything I had fought for: freedom, self-acceptance, peace. The decision to sever ties with my past had been a hard one, but as time went on, I could see how necessary it had been. I had created a new family, one forged from deep friendships, mutual respect, and shared values. The people I had chosen to surround myself with were those who knew me for who I truly was. I had invested in relationships that nurtured me, that challenged me to be better, and that never made me feel small or inadequate. The kind of love I had searched for in my family was here, but it wasn't about blood. It was about connection. It was a crisp autumn day when I was at a local cafe, having coffee with Sarah, one of my closest friends. We'd been through a lot together, both of us had had our fair share of family struggles, yet somehow, we'd built a friendship that felt like home. It was our ritual, meeting at the cafe and sharing stories, sometimes laughing until we couldn't breathe, other times talking about the serious stuff, what we had learned, what we had let go of, and what we still wanted from life. You know, Sarah said, glancing at me with that knowing look she had, it's been so incredible to see how far you've come. I remember the days when you were struggling to figure it all out. You've really created something special for yourself. I smiled at her, feeling a warmth in my chest. I didn't know how to get here at the time, I said, swirling my coffee absent-mindedly. But I think it was always about finding a way to love myself first. And once I did that, everything else just followed. She nodded thoughtfully. You always had it in you, David. You just needed to believe it. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of pride. The kind of pride that wasn't about accomplishments or accolades, but about knowing that I had made the right choices for myself, even when the world told me I was wrong. Then, out of the blue, I received an email that caught my attention. It was from a distant relative, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The subject line simply read, "I think you should know." Curiosity piqued, I opened it. Inside was a short message, informing me that my family had heard about Elena and Daniel's messy breakup. It seemed that their marriage, the one they had rushed into after Elena's divorce from James, had fallen apart not long after they'd gotten together. From what I read, Elena had once again been unfaithful, this time to Daniel. The email concluded with a brief note from my relative, "We've all been hearing rumors. James is devastated, and everyone in the family now knows you were right about everything. I just wanted to let you know that, in hindsight, I think we all owe you an apology." I sat there, staring at the screen for a long time. The bitter part of me wanted to respond, to remind them of how they had dismissed me, of how they had turned their backs on me when I had tried to help. But that part of me was fleeting now. It didn't have the power it once did. I thought for a moment. Was this my chance for closure? For them to finally acknowledge the truth? But I quickly realized that the closure I needed had already come. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. I had already done the hard work of accepting that they were incapable of seeing me for who I truly was. I had already moved on. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Days turned into weeks, and as I moved forward, I found myself truly embracing the life I had worked so hard to build. I made plans with friends, took trips that filled me with wonder, and continued to work on projects that brought me joy. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing I was living authentically, on my own terms. One evening, I was sitting at my desk, working on a new writing project, when the phone buzzed with a message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. "David, I hope this message finds you well. This is James." I frowned as I read the text, the memories of our last conversation coming rushing back. I hadn't heard from him in years. And the truth was, I wasn't sure what to expect. "I don't expect you to respond," the message continued. "But I wanted to tell you something. I'm sorry. For everything. I should have listened to you all those years ago. Elena. She was never right for me. I was blinded by what I thought I wanted. You were right. I see that now." I sat back in my chair, the weight of the message settling over me. Part of me felt relief. Another part felt indifferent. I had long since let go of the need for validation from James or anyone else. But there was something healing about hearing him finally admit the truth, even if it came too late. I took a deep breath and typed a response. "Thank you for the message. I hope you find peace." I set the phone down, staring out the window at the quiet street below. It was another small moment of closure, but it wasn't what I had been waiting for. What I had been waiting for had already happened, inside me. I had learned the importance of letting go, of walking away from the people and situations that no longer served me. And as the days continued to unfold, I realized that there was nothing left to prove. No one had to understand the journey I had taken. I didn't need anyone's apology or acknowledgement. I had built a life I was proud of, one based on my own values, my own understanding, and my own strength. I wasn't the person I had been when I tried to warn James. I wasn't the person I had been when I was rejected by my family. I was something more. Something better. I had learned to trust myself, to follow my own path, no matter how difficult or lonely it seemed at times. In the end, the past no longer had a hold on me. I had freed myself from the chains of resentment and regret. I had written my own story, one where I was in control of the narrative. And that was all I needed. The future was wide open, and I was ready for whatever came next. Because I had already overcome the hardest part, I had learned how to be free. If you enjoyed this thrilling journey, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the latest content. Share this story with your friends, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay tuned for more suspenseful adventures.